Alright, the Haynes Welding Manual, Chapter 7, Cutting and Welding, Plasma Cutting and Welding. Just as the emergency, lower cost, high efficiency make machines have been something of a revolution in small shop, home shop, welding the last 10 years as plasma technology changed with the face of metal cutting. While the technology has been around for a while, it has been has been seen by most welders as the high technology setup that seem complicated or hard to use. Plasma technology biggest use have been plasma arc welding cutting, or PAW. It's still used in this form by many industries. Simple plasma cutting, the plasma arc cutting technology, getting very little play at times, taking some of your equipment, years of equipment to filter down, generally getting welding cutting marketplace. The MIGs were originally considered to be only set up as the provinces of small shops, amateur fabricating equipment fabricator due to mainly introduce less expensive imported women that really opened up the new market to hobbyists. Today, domestic welding manufacturers suddenly became aware of these new markets with smaller version equipment. They have been selling it to the industries along with a broad increase in completion to fray. Today is a wide selection of plasma machines to choose from small 110 volt AC portable large shop equipment materials up to 1 inch thick. Step 1. Plasma cutting can be done outdoors, but very lightly bothered by wind. Makes very cuts on ferrous and non-ferrous metals and produces no smoke, very little sparks. Has become the modern way to cut metal. The operator should be wearing gloves at the long sleeve and a long sleeve shirt. The illustration shows the basic components of plasma arc layout. The two bottles of shielding gas are really only required for large industrial machines, not home shop and portables with a run compressed air. With a medium-large size plasma cutters can be used with straight mechanized body for tracing. You have your shield gas, not always needed, and your cutting gas. And then do the plasma cutting power supply with a workpiece grounded. Manufacture the manual torch, input voltage, remote control, and mechanized torch. Usable today. Increasingly cutting side of the plasma technology with the incredibly easy learn curve with a lot of special installation costs. The benefit of the plasma arc cutting we usually call plasma cutting are being repeated today in the body shop, the muffler shop, the wrecking yards, and sheet metal shop due to the duct repair, street rod with race car builders, fabrication shops. Among the benefits of the use of the plain Shop Air Compressor, no dangerous gases, no flames, smoother cuts, and less distortion in the edges of the cut. Little oxidation edges of the incredible speed. In best practice and principle, the plasma forge process using the torch, sometimes like a TIG torch, electrodes deeply recessed into the torch, which can take the works and be contaminated. The arc maintained with a needle-like point, and when the air between the electrode and the work is ionized, the air and the gas around the electrode are heated to such a point which reach the plasma state in which the gases themselves are conducted electricity while the gas is ionized, making continuity of the arc and process between the electrode and the work. That another gas introduced around the nozzle. In case of the plasma welding, the gas is inert shale gas. In the case of plasma cutting, the compressed air in either the welding or cutting the action takes place very narrow stream. Alright, 7.3 shows if the needle of the arc version of the plasma welding narrow tail all follows the weld, it makes 100% penetration top and bottom with a technique used mostly with the precision industrial applications. Plasma arc welding. The original plasma technology was developed in laboratories of the Lindell Air Product Company, and the pioneer in many welding processes known as the L-Tech Company. Basically, in the late 50s, the other companies that have worked with the refining equipment, the process ever since the finish of the welding, the plasma welding cutting. You won't find plasma welding cutting in the most welding supplies stores, but a few industries catalog this kind of equipment. Usually sold through the company representation. Most of the equipment is used with a high precision joining of very thin materials. Although up until the last 10 years, both plasma welding and cutting have been virtually reserved for industrial purposes only. Most of the plasma arc welding equipment is still expensive and limited industrial usage for the process of working worth looking at. In the operation of plasma torch, the central tungsten electrode tucked up on the inside of the nozzle, the most restrictive of the other welding gun nozzles. This is close to the electrode, increasingly tighter, and gets close to the tip of the electrode until just of the hole of the arc come through. An orifice of the gas is forced through the nozzle and speeds up the air-fuel mixture going through the carburetor ventry. The gas is usually argon inside the welder's power source. Is a high-frequency arc starting system, not unlike the conventional TIG machine, but it initiates the arc, and since the electrode does not stick out, it can get close, even enough to the work to metal to start the arc and establish itself. This is called pilot arc circuitry. Generally, they'll cut out after the arc is established. The current arc electrode superheats the argon until its gas itself conducts electricity in long, extremely hot arc is created with the welded work. The second inert gas introduced the large nozzle around the inner core with some of the cone cooling gases formed around the long arc column to protect the welding area of the contamination. Much as other electrical arc welding processes. There are several methods of welding in plasma technology. Conventional method akin with the TIG welding, where the filler rod is added to the needle air process, where parts are fused with a filler rod. With the keyhole method, welded with a filler rod can be made with the actual fuse of the parent metal, while the whole mating surface at the same time, top and bottom, later produces the pure, uncontaminated joint as possible. The benefits of using plasma arc welding over conventional TIG welding is that it is easier to operate as far as maintaining the arc length, and exactly the welder has a better view of the process. Although you may find one or two plasma arc welding units in catalog, most technology in the industrial situations, mechanized torch and water cooling amp ranges up to 300 and 400. Most manual operating plasma welders do not have much amperage of the conventional welders. The LTEC catalog shows a 110 volt amp, 15 amp unit, or 100 amp, 220 volt three-phase machine. Some of the 730 pounds that only welds up to 1/8 of an inch plate, although it has 100% duty cycle and maximum output. For the most part, most of the reason, most plasma article of which welding was probably not for the home shop. Most flexible, light, and more affordable conventional equipment is available to making welds. However, there's no question it is the practical application technology everyday situation eminently provided with the plasma arc welding cutting equipment. 7.4. In the plasma arc cutting, there is usually only one gas, and all about the big machines. This air is the Shop Air Compressor, which is forced around the electrode to blow cur off only neatly. In plasma cutting technology is much of the same with welding, but the arc is evenly constricted to the plasma temperature so that the arc can cut with any metal. The very restricted cut in the pencil line through the metal, the sharp force for the gas nozzle blows for the melted metal. The curved C illustration, the velocity steadiness for the cutting axe, such as the edges of the cut and kept in the straight clean. The benefits of plasma arc welding cutting metal is cutting any metal or many. The cuts are very clean, like a little oxidization of the metal found with the oxyacetylene cutting. The velocity of the action cutting creates a smoother edge and even a great deal less cleanup. In fact, the industrial units are great. Industrial units, the mechanized, much like glass frame cutter with a part and pattern cutter that cuts need cleanup preparation for the welding. There is little or no slag found on the bottom edge of the curve. The plasma arc, considering with a much safer than made work of the environments for the gas cutting, the non-flammable, the gases involved with no smoke with the cutting action and to bother the welder He can watch the process more closely. There is less sparks coming from the undercutting. If the remembered light marking toys, you have that kid with where you have pushed the plunger while the wheel around the scrapping against the tiny flint making sparks. The highest small scale version of what you've seen in plasma cutting. The high contrasting of the gas cutting, where there is lots of heat generated, the blobs of molten metal are constantly falling on the floor under the cut, creating a fire hazard. There's some heating action plasma cutting, but there's short time that depending on the thickness of the material you have cut, the parts are ready to be handled with the further work. The gas cutting torch, the parts are still red hot. They have been described in plasma cutting are almost cold cut. The benefit of the cooler cutting action is much less than the heat induced by the parent metal, so the working of the material is greatly warped, reduced warpage. Um, this is why this is what made the plasma cutter so popular. Automotive body sheet metal work. The material can be cut virtually no distortion. Cuts may be made as one body describes it as faster as you could draw a line on a pencil. A few minutes of file and sandpaper the edge of it already. Some of the work would either be welded or left as a finished edge because of the lower heat and the reduced sparks. Panel cutting with cars on cars is much easier, even though the secondary panel on the other side becomes less damage than what the other side of the painting surface. They need not to be left untouched. 7.5 Plasma cutters have become very popular auto body men with the cleanest and speedy in the cutting body with the panel. The sheet metals need very little prep, and plasma cutter can be painted in rusty metal just as easy. Bodymen also like the fact that you can make a cut and lay down the torch, do something, and pick up the torch again and start cutting with another function to perform the other part. Putting your safety helmet down, putting on the torch trigger, the gas torch. When you gas cutting torch, this is always danger what to do between the cuts when it's touching flame with a full bore. It shall be kept if you keep shutting it off each time, you have to go through the process of relighting and adjusting it every time. Last reason why the plasma arc cutting has become a total choice for the now in wrecking yards across the country is a yard full of discarded cars with flammable upholstery and still them various pools of oil, gasoline, and other fluids and sewage soaked in the ground all around. Oxysilicate cutting of the cars wrecked yards has also been a hazardous job. Also, the torch and the bottles have heavy setup have been hauled to the various parts of the wrecking yard, and whether with a good plasma machine, 220-volt cutter can be plugged in a small shop shed central in the yard. The plasma torch can cut as long as 234 feet, could be used and cut almost anywhere with a lot less fire damage and much faster speeds than 10 to 20 faster than the silicone equipment. Because the plasma machine has an arc circuitry built into it, the most plasma arc torches do not need the contact with the metal to get started. When decided advantage of body work, once the arc is started and the gas is ionized conductor, the plasma torch can cut through the rusty metal paint metal. Every section of the car body will have Bondo uncutting on them. While using oxysilicate torch can be body and sheet metal with the cutting edge of the blackened, scarred, blistered, while the plasma edges have the gray discoloration near the edge of it, and that's it. In fabrication shop, one of the biggest advantages of the plasma arc cutting equipment is the fact that all the metals can be handled equally with the steel, with aluminum, and the stainless steel plated with the galvanized metal, with non-ferrous metal, like aluminum, Tentacle stainless steel, which are normally hard to cut. The cleaning and other methods with the plasma machines are applied with the shops. The author remembers the experience of the plasma cutter some of the years back. The aluminum motor plate was made for a race car when we needed only to cut a 14 inches hole out of the center to clear the flywheel. The material was 1/4 inch thick with aluminum and 77 T6, which is hard to have the difficult which is so hard you can have difficulty even drilling unless you have a fresh bit. The ideal using a saber saw or bandsaw seemed tedious and out of the question. When he took the shop that had a plasma cutter, which meant for making the plywood circle template to run the torch around, and we had the hole cut out on very little or perfect edges and then very opening. It was eye-opening. We tried one you maybe similar maze. Whereas the picture of 7.6 shows the shop air compressor. Air is always required to run most of the plasma cutters. Here, back in the thermodynamics machines, is the air filter and pressure regulator. When the plasma arc cutting equipment first came to the wider, less industrial use, some of the traditional fabricators by then intimated the technology wasn't widely understood. The term plasma seemed to indicate some of the high technical processes, eccentric lasers. Once the machine got into the field, they quickly became they accepted for the speed and cleanliness, lack of maintenance, low fire hazard, easy with the welder, and can be operated then. And it almost pulled the trigger to the point with a shoot with a kind process. Perhaps one of the bigger attractions of the plasma plasma cutting equipment we have mentioned is the type of the gases used in the process. With big industrial plasma machines, usually traditional shielding glass like argon for the arc pilot gas or hydrogen nitrogen gas mixture, like 35% hydrogen, 65% argon. The cutting process, the most portable plasma units today use nothing but more than compressed air from a Shop Air Compressor, and there are no expensive bottles to buy or periodically refill. This is how Shop Air works, and where the air and when the glasses are in the arc column. Ionized, it becomes the arc medium between the work on the electrode. Nitrogen happens to ionize the weld, making the hot arc, but it also happens to make about 75% of the air around by its weight. The plasma cutter uses the high velocity of the chop compressed air to become ionized arc gas. The cutting of the gas blows, then get material out of the cut. The cutting, cooling the medium. It's also been assumed that all the shops already have a heavy-duty air compressor on the hand operating other equipment, so using the shop is very greatly simplifying the use of a plasma cutter, keeping expensive down. The industrial situation, pure nitrogen or hydrogen mix is used total to clean out the precision work with the shop air cuts, the more of the good enough for the automotive fabricating shop usage. Choosing a plasma cutting equipment. The large extents for the heavy industrial plasma cutters with welders are specifically on purpose for high precision, high production mechanized work, often required a 2-jas model with a 3-phase power, 200 to 600 amps. Using the water cooling of the torch as well. For the reason, well concentrated wide array, more portable plasma cutters are available to home and shop use. Most operate with a 220 volt single phase current, used only to chop the compressed air cutting of the cooling. At basic level, the home shop the user may be interested thereby. Number of domestic and import of the plasma cutter with the weight with 7 pounds less for the capable of cutting the material thickness than the automotive be able to use it, and the user of the world would come across if comparing the plasma cutter cutting the welders. Do not be alarmed. The amperage of the small plasma machines with unit with a 50 amp capability can cut up to 3/4 inch thick, an area where the comparison with the welders are small machines and low duty cycled with a cutting of speed down to the thicker metals are cut. Alright, in the 110 volt category, the Daytona MIG offers the pocket plasma, which pulls out all 25 amp to 20% duty cycle, cut shields more than 100 inches per minute. They are said to cut up to 3/16 of an inch steel material requires that 70 psi or air input and about the rate of 4 to 6 cubic feet per minute. Makes a several 110 volt with a speed of, with a spectrum of 187D, cutting out the 9/64 inch steel material weighing 47 pounds. Thermal dynamics starting with extensive lines off of the dynamic 110, which cuts up to 3/16 of an inch steel using solid state circuitry, sequentially lights and amazing 80% duty cycle with the 20 amps. See illustration with all the Alright, 7.7, the compact plasma cutter market was represented 110 volts, such as the plasma cutter with the Daytona MIG is put out with 25 amps weighing 55 pounds using the 4 cubic feet per minute at air 70% PSI. Another quite portable plasma machine, the PCM VPI LTC-EC, which offers the cut of the 5/8 of an inch steel and various variable amps of 10 to 40 and 60 cycle duty cycle rated with the maximum operates to 220 volt cycle. With all the machines available, the maximum cutting thickness is usually given the middle mild steel with aluminum, other non-ferrous machines. Material, the more the amps the same machine can have, only lesser the thickness for these materials. On some machines, figure that may be advertised give the maximum thickness in cutting, and another higher figure than serving the action of shortcut with the welding cutting length of material. Our 7.9 is one of the Miller's small plasma cutters with a spectrum 187D, weighs 47 pounds, yet it can cut up to 9/64 of an inch material, runs at 110 volt house current. 710, the popular plasma arc equipment really jumped up for the last 5 years now. Imported units are sold by the here and tool companies of the Matico have them as well as traditional welding equipment manufacturers. 711 HTP entry level plasma cutter in the 220 volt current with the butt weighs only 556 pounds, set up to the cut up to 1/4 inch, and it has a 100% copper wounded transformer. Beyond the 25 amp range, it seems like they are limited to 110 volt equipment. The machines with the 220 volt input is still quiet, portable. The HDME American offers an affordable plasma cutter with a micro cut 250 with a cuts up to 3/16 of an inch with a micro cut 375. Can also be used at 110, 220 volt and 460 volt, 460 volt input with a 7.5 to 35 amps, cutting at 3/8 of an inch steel, as well as a larger shop unit. The LTC has the popular unit of the PC VPI, which weighs 46 pounds with a plasma cutting carrying hand. Lobot said that cutting the 5/8 of an inch steel of the lights of the power and features a 60% duty cycle to 40 amps output is good for a choice for the automotive shop that can serve up to 3/4 inch, much as the rebar from the construction site. Lincoln's entry level, the plasma cutting the Pro Cut 40 with 60% duty cycle with a 40 amps at 220 volts. Cuts into 3/8 of an inch steel off the time piloted time post flow. Daytona's mixed medium sized line inputs 35 amps, 220 volt bolts. Pro 35 said to cut up 3/8 of an inch steel quickly and through 1/2 inch steel with 15 inches per minute. Alright, above the 50 ampere range, the plasma arc cutting the weld equipment is the serious shop equipment. Most of the machine, the 220 volt 3-phase with input. With you wouldn't have you wouldn't have most of the home garage and small shop. The large group of the choice of the cutter, the total amperage range from 50 amps to 150 amps or more. In this category, you find the Lincoln Pro Cut 125 amp 60 duty cycle, the macro compressor controlled over the shooter limiter and the drag detect circuitry that is said to prevent consumable damage. And the machine, let's look at the duty cycle for the professional grade plasma cutter rated with a 60% duty cycle as its highest is 125 output. Has an 80% duty cycle with 110 amps with 100% duty cycle at 100 amps or less. At the highest output with the machine cuts a 1 inch steel, ordinarily 1/2 inch plate. It can cut all day long. The difference in the heavier professional machines is having strong component weather. Working heavy material not just a few times a day, but all the day with the overbuilt, with a too expensive a home shop built, marking even the disregarding the 3-phase input power required. Unpowerful plasma arc cutter, the HEP PC 65 amps, the 220 volt single phase cut up to 3/4 inch steel, cleans out on 5/8 inch steel, 50% duty cycle at 60 amps, weighs 108 pounds, hyper them that 100 amps at a max 100 that will cut 1 1/4 inch steel at 220 volt, 440 volt, 3-phase power of the constant current transistorized output with the ESEAB, others than PCS 90 that cuts up to 1 inch steel, whether the 3-phase 220 volt or 440 volt, have the air pre-flow, post-flow, low air pressure sensor. The LTEC has a PCMI 1000i, which can cut one steel production speed up to 80% amps at 70 duty cycle, maximum average if it weighs only 80 pounds. The Daytona MiG has a full line of the heavy duty plasma cutter, while the Plasma Professional 120 near the top of 120 amps, 220 volt 3-phase cuts up to 1 1/8 of inch steel and 7/8 of inch aluminum with quick disconnect torches so that you can switch the mechanic torch for the cutting table. See illustrations. Our 712, the bigger amp machines are the 220 volt category, many with the Daytona MiG with the plasma proof. The 50 requires shop type 3-phase current to one of the 3 to 5 duty cycles as it rated with the 650 amps at 100% amps at 30%. 713 still a little bit portable, powerful strength of cutting the 34 and 3/4 inch steel. The LTC PC MI 750i with the 50 amps at the 40 duty cycle has the setting that has only the torch and string, storage spool, and spares parts of storage compartment. The large plasma cutter cutting machine with the 3-phase power category with the Plasma Professional 150 Daytona MiG that is weighs 317 pounds, has a range of 20 to 150 amps and can cut 1 1/2 inch steel and 1 aluminum and 1 inch aluminum at 30 inches per minute. Most machines often feature the infinitely variable output control, means that you can dial the extra exact requirement for the job, saying cutting through outer skin on the vehicle without cutting the panels on the other side Of course, you can cut the thin materials with more power as required by you, and the right amount of them means that you have less damage for the flying sparks on the less expensive end of the plasma cutting spectrum. Some of the machines only offer the knob in several predetermined positions. Beyond the 80 and 120 volt, 20 amp range for the plasma cutter, where the really large plate for the cutting all day, the equipment offered is no longer usable at the shop air, requiring the 2 in air gas supplies the welding or cooling of the torch. However, they offer the 100 amps for the much over the 60 amps, the higher amperage for the usually found on the machine, built to be used for the mechanized torch as well with this 100% duty cycle. Obviously, the kind of power does not arrive at your doorstep without a healthy invoice. Alright, 715 large machine usually offered at the optional 180-degree straight torch for you for the shape cutting machines and industrial work. If you thought modern MIG brought the greatly advanced the ease of learning with the operating curve, wait until you try plasma cutting. There's much improvement over the gas torch cutting, but learning the curve, reducing maintenance for the watch for the race car mechanic, large shop being trained in another work to utilize the plasma cutter. The newcomer in the technology made with its first 4-inch by 6-inch part from 3/8 inch steel part only within 15 minutes by the instruction. After experimenting with the different speeds, power level, the maintenance materials, he was ready to do real jobs within an hour. You can learn everything more that is now known about the process in the first day, but the story is typically the first-time user. Unlike the welder, most cutters of the shop type vary with the ready for the use of the uncrate them. They are power cord ready to plug in. If you do not have too much, put on your own plug. The torch is usually already hooked up on the front of the machine that you already have to connect to your shop air and supply before making the first cuts. Although the risk of an injury left with the plasma cutter with a welder access silicone cutting torch, you will still take the precaution before starting to read over the instruction manual that came with the machine before doing anything. When you are familiar with all the control of the torch appear with you'll understand the works of special design electrodes or other parts of the may vary with the make to make it. Whether it make them, you notice the electrode is like no other seen instead of a 6-inch long rod tungsten as in the TIG torch or the plasma electrode as an inch is much parted. Although it never comes in contact with the work, the plasma kernel electrode is still considered the semi-consumable item, and the electrodes can last a long time, but several spares on hand become that they do not get contaminated with the material blown back with the cutting. See illustration. Besides even enough material will blow back on the cutting to cover the building of slag and expose the nozzle to the orifice of the torch, requiring periodic maintenance. Besides the electrode, you will find several other pieces inside the plasma torch, including the nozzle is called the shield cup, the retaining cup, the gas diffuser, cutting tip with the converges the airflow with the pass. The electrode, a different brand for the torch, has small springs, insulators, or small swirl rings, but the basic principle is the same for all the brands. This is much less dangerous with the plasma cutter than other equipment. Yet there is still sparks generated. There's an ultraviolet radiation because the process does not seem bright or intense with welding. Some users are tempted to perform plasma cutting without proper safety wear, but their skin can be still burned. So you wear long sleeve shirts with the collar and cuff buttoned up. Wear leather welding gloves and full face shield. If you ever have the work on the machine, you should be unplugged, even if you are doing all the even if you're doing as changing the electrode. The machine output of high enough voltage cause the severe shock and injury as you are cutting them and painted plated galvanized metal to ensure that there are adequate ventilation. Plasma does not create fumes in by itself what unsurfaced metal can. Alright, the illustration 717, the main component is typical plasma cutting the torch from left to the torch body O-ring threaded with an extension swirl ring, electrode cutting nozzle, and the retaining cup. Some of the brands are slightly different arrangement parts inside. 718, the hot rodders never leave anything alone, but rugged thermal dynamics 50 amp plasma cutter used with the rod shop that has a modified additional tubing rack with box at the top of the hold the nozzle dip of the plasma consumables. On most machines, there is a high-frequency arc starting circuit that makes it unnecessary to touch the work with a touch and initiate the arc and set up the output voltage. Machine depends on the thickness of the metal you are running. On some of the smallest machines, there may just be on an off-on switch with a switch of 2 to 3 amperage position. Most machines have a variable knob spanning the machine's minimum amperage to maximum. Use a guide to some kind of make a straight practice cup. Place the torch in the outer cup. The ride Rise your guide with a nozzle and suggested distance for the work. Just push the button, and then the arc will start, and it will. Alright, 719, you need to keep that in the hands of spare each for the torch, include the wrench for the changing with the tip of the electrode. 720, using a plasma cutter makes very clean cuts, so regardless of your means, your hand wasn't steady, use a sturdy guide, whether the possible with a piece of tubing as a straight edge and dry run being made to ensure that the torch follows the correct cutting line. 721. The clever tool snaps onto the Miller plasma torch holds the torch and just a distance away from the work, so that if you have a sturdy guide, your torch cut should almost good and machine operates. The same tool previous photo shows that it holds down and the tip of the way from the work provides a good surface to lightly drag against the pattern of the straight edge. Alright, it is the piece of metal, if you know needed the edge of the plate to get with the start of at the beginning of the blowing of the slag to the bottom, move along the stage speed, but your cutting develop the type feel for the correct cutting speed with the various metal, but the instruction with the various machine should tell you the recommended speed, the various thickness of material. Practice moving the torch 3 times without the arc, just as you see how fast or slow is at 15 inches per minute, and it may be, and 100 inches per minute feels like. Examine the cut edge material line for the cut and now straight with up and down the speed off. If the lines are too direct, the cut was made. Your cutting speed was too fast. You can also have some of the one else will observe the short distance while you're cutting. They will have tell you if the sparks were straight down, proper speed, sprayed more than the direction the torch came from. The too fast, moving the too fast can cause the premature failure of the nozzle. When the part you have cools enough to pick up the examine the curve that you can cutting speed and amperage for the right to the small amount with the slag bottom with the curve that can be easily chipped off with the wire cutter pilers, and as the rest of the metal should be minimum cleanup. The cutting shape that you use for the plywood patterns to cut the repeated shape that is assumed with the round square hole to anything else that adjusts the temple is right side with the torch and the head follows the basic circles. Most welding supply shops have a circle cutting tool, sometimes called the circle cutting compass, that can be used with the plasma cutter. Alright, 723. At the top of the 2 cuts made with the whole handheld plasma cutter, and the top of the one of the torch is moved too fast while not enough amperage. The middle plate has been spread with not enough amperage. Has not been speed more correct. The bottom plate of the comparison only with the oxytil is in cut with the machine with such the smoothness as are truly dry, duplicating. Only a gas torch would have this discoloration of metals shown. Alright, by the far most important thing of the maintaining the opportunity for the plasma arc cutter, the condition quality of the air returns, read the manufacturer recommendation on the side of the compressor that you need the pressure for this cubic feet per minute requirements. If you try to make a cut when you do not have enough air, the most machines will either not start or make the grinding like noise inside. With having enough air, plasma cutters are also require clean, dry air. Will become equipped with a dryer regulator right in the airline connection back with the machine. But you may need a good dryer on your compressor, and if your compressor is very far from your hookup with a flexible line with a plasma cutter with a good idea to install the one with the wall just added with the connection. For the flex line, your compressor for the dryer should be able to drain every night and to remove the dirt and moisture. Moist air rapidly deteriorates the electrodes and nozzles. Alright, 124. As the traditional torching stone, torch cutting, the soapstone is used for making the mark for the cutting lines and making the world won't be burn off. With the reduced heat of the plasma, you can use the marker or the pen sharpen the soapstone before drawing. Here are the exhaust gaskets being traced with the making thick of the hedge flanges with a piece of the 3/8 inch steel plate. Alright, cutting too fast, trying to cut the thick material and the size of the machine, having to come up slag buildup inside of the new nozzle plasma of the gun, unlike the buildup with the MIG inside of the MIG gun. In fact, you may have same anti-splatter spray dip in your plasma cutter as you have in your MIG torch to make the slag buildup easy to remove. Even though if you take care of the plasma torch, you have to replace nozzle electrodes because of the usage will enlarge the holes, making less concentrated arc. If any slag is fired onto the nozzle or electrode, sand it off and hold it in the part squarely against the sandpaper on the flat surface, then clean out the orifice hole. Alright, 726. The 50 amp plasma cutter making short work with the cutting out of the patterns can easily pierce through the center of the pattern to cut out of the internal holes and shapes. 727. The drying cleaning air extremely important, extending the life of the plasma nozzle electrode. The HTP super dry air dryers have the bronze filter with a descendant inside that change for the color of the need for the be changed. 728. The most application for the HTP super dryer disposable fly dryers can be screwed right onto the rear of the machine. Alright. 729. You can have the air too dry for the plasma of the cutting of the compressor outside long distance away from the extra filter dryer with the wall hard line switch is flexible over the plasma cutter drain daily. The maximum dry of the HGP 3-stage system stage with one self-draining 5 micron filters to 2 colon teeth filter with the final stage of another filter with a large amount of dissonance. Change in color can absorb any of the humidity that can be dried out over the oven for the use. You'll find that there is too much to discuss further about the plasma cutter to operate. There is only the same time technically advanced yet similarly to operate to maintain the form exactly that they are claimed in terms of speed, cleanliness for the cuts, lack of cleaning required, minimal heating and induced for the adjacent parts. Plasma cutting is the most definitely performed modern method of cutting materials in situation ranging from the air conditioned duct remaining the automotive body, working with a good gouge metal with the industrial plans, familiar with shapes are cut with thick plates all day long. The two most automotive enthusiasts, race car shops, modern shops, the combination with a good MIG gun with welding, a completely convenient plasma cutter machine for cutting. See illustrations. Alright, 731. The Daytona MIG offers several air filters from the left, a disposable filter element, a wall mount filtering hose, mounting filtering hose in front of the small disposable filter. And 732. Given the preference of today's hot rod race car building farm or fabricator would have one each reliable, easy to use MIG welder, a safe, clean, and equally easy to use plasma cutter. Chapter 8. Safety shop equipment.